For your calculations, make sure that you include the name and the date on your report, and also that you copy from the label the number that you have for your unknown. So in your table, you have the mass of your crucible, like you're cleaning your crucible with a paper towel, then you're heating up the crucible, you're waiting until it cools down, you determine the mass of your empty crucible. Now you're going to add your solid into the crucible until the mass of your crucible increases by about 2 grams, right? And you're copying exactly the mass that you have for your crucible with the solid. So in number 3, that's the first one where you actually have to perform a calculation. You have the mass of your crucible with your hydrate, right, with your solid inside, and you have the mass of your crucible empty. So the difference between mass of your crucible with your hydrate, that one number 2, minus the mass of your empty crucible, that's going to give you the mass of the hydrate that you have in your crucible. That's how you calculate the mass of your hydrate. Then as part of your procedure, you're heating up your crucible, right, with a flame first that is not too intense, and you're heating up your crucible for 5 minutes. Then you're changing the setup of your flame to get an intense flame. So you're heating up your crucible 5 minutes, and right after those 5 minutes, an additional 10 minutes. Not removing the crucible from the flame, it's just changing the flame that you're using. Okay? Gentle for 5, and then you adjust your flame to get an intense flame, and you keep heating until 10 minutes. So your total of 15 minutes of heating up your crucible with the solid or your hydrate inside. After that, you remove your crucible, you wait until it cools down, and that's when you're determining that mass right there, the mass of the crucible and compound after the first heating. Your first heating is a total of 15 minutes, 5 with a gentle flame plus 10 using an intense flame. You're determining that mass, and now you come back to your Bunsen burner, to your bench, and you're going to continue to heat your crucible for an additional 5 minutes using an intense flame. So after you cool down your crucible with your hydrated compound, or with your compound inside, after those 5 minutes you're cooling it down and you're determining the mass for that second heating. So the mass of your first heating here and the mass of your second heating, you should have about the same number. So you have to make sure that you're using the same mass balance all across your experiment. For your trial 1, same mass balance since the beginning. Empty crucible with the hydrate. After your first heating, after the second heating, all of them with the same one, to avoid errors in your measurements. So now you can actually perform the calculations 6 through 9 because you have the numbers that you need. After the final heating, after those 5 minutes that you have a total of 15 before your first heating, then an additional 5, and that's after your second heating or final. So the mass of your compound without water, because that's what you're actually doing, you have your hydrated compound that contains water molecules. You're heating up that hydrated compound to evaporate the water. So now you have a compound with no water, which is what you need right there in number 6. So to calculate the mass of your compound with no water, you're doing what you have in number 5. Right? And your 5, it's your crucible with the compound after all the water has evaporated, hopefully. So evaporating all of the water, it's going to give you just your compound with no water. So if you subtract the mass that you have right there in your number 5 minus the mass of your empty crucible, that's going to give you the mass of the compound that you have in your crucible with no water, which is what you need in number 6. Then in number 7, you're trying to find out how much water was evaporated from your compound. So look, in number 3, you have the mass of your compound with the water because that's before evaporating the water. And then in number 6, you have the mass of your compound with no water. So if you have the mass of your compound with water in number 3, and you subtract the mass of your compound with no water, which should give you a smaller number, that will give you the mass of the water that is evaporated from your compound. And then in number 8, you're calculating the percent by mass of water in your hydrated compound. So to get that percent by mass, that's the mass of the water divided by the mass of your hydrated compound times 100. So the number that you're calculating in number 7, right there, that's the mass of the water that evaporated divided by the mass of your hydrated compound, which is what we have right there in number 3, times 100. That should give you a percentage. Just make sure that you put those numbers in parentheses in the same way that I have 7 divided by number 3. So the water divided by the hydrated compound, that in parentheses, and then times 100. Now you're doing the experiment 2 times, so same thing for trial 1 and trial 2. And after you have all of your calculations for trial 1 and trial 2, you can calculate the average, which is going to be whatever you're calculating in number 8 for your percentage for your trial 1, plus whatever you're calculating in number 8, which is your percentage for trial 2. Add those two together, divided by 2, that will give you your percentage. Make sure that you include at least one example for your calculations, and that you put also the units. When you're calculating mass of the hydrated compound, that's grams. If you're calculating the percentage, put the percentage. Now, really quickly for your post-lab questions, you have the answer for number 1 in page 63 in your lab manual. For number 2, you need to think about this one, okay? You're calculating, or you're trying to find out what's going to happen to the percentage if you spill some of the compound after it was heated. So you get the percentage is the mass of the water divided by the mass of the hydrate. So you have to think about spilling your compound with no water, and how does that affect what numbers you have in here in your equation. Which one is going to be affected by spilling your compound with no water? And based on that, you can find the answer for your question number 2. And then for question number 3, you have to get the mass for your compounds here in the table. So you have how to do that in the video for introduction and procedure. So you're going to calculate the masses for all 4. With the mass, you're going to use that one to find out the percent by water in your 4 compounds, and you have also that in the video. And with those 2 numbers, you can get the percent for all of those, for all of these 4. And you need to compare the percentage here, the one that you're calculating for those 4, with the percent that you're calculating for your actual samples. So you have your 2 trials, you're getting your average for the percentages for trial 1 and trial 2. So compare that average with the percentages that you're calculating in that table. And with that, you can find out which one is the one that you were using.